Thanks for the warm welcome. It's lovely to be here. I want to be a little bit provocative this morning. The patient's experience is everything. What I'd like you to do is just in pairs, just for half a minute, just talk about what comes to your mind or what feelings are evoked when I say the patient's experience is everything. Away you go. It is a statement that's close to my heart, and because many moons ago, and I apologise to those who know me, but I used to be a Franciscan monk, a friar. That's a little bit different, isn't it? That's not me. Don't adjust your spectacles. That's Father Dan. I haven't got any younger. Father Dan was my appraiser, and I used to work at the Royal North Sydney Hospital with women being treated for breast cancer in the oncology ward, and I would spend 5 or 10 minutes with them asking or just really listening to their stories, because I didn't have a lot to say really. They had a lot to say to me. And I remember coming home with my appraisal meeting where every month you put down and said, how's things going? What could you do differently? What have you learnt? And he said to me, Father Dan said to me, Mike, what have you learnt from your patients? How have they shaped you both personally and professionally? Because Mike, if you think about it, you are a product of your patients. I sort of thought about that, and I thought I was the one giving the care, not the other way round. But when I thought about it more, I started to think, what am I learning from my patients? How are they shaping me, both personally and professionally? How are they shaping my humanity as a carer? And that's a profound question, I think, that we all, as health professionals in the room, have to think about. And I'm sure as we do take the time to reflect on that, there'll be lots of things where we have been shaped by those we serve, by those we seek to help. I keep going back, I'll get the hang of this in a tick. I think why we focus on patient experience is because emotions trump cognition. If you think about our healthcare, when people come in with a health issue, they often carry with them emotional issues, emotional baggage behind that healthcare experience, that healthcare illness. And that's quite significant in the way it impacts on their experience of the health service. I guess it reminds me of when I was living in England and my wife had a miscarriage, and we were speaking with a nurse who also had a miscarriage, and she said, Mike, I'll just quickly tell you my story. I had the miscarriage, I went into accident and emergency to have my DNC, I sat down, and she said, this is my experience, Mike. I'm just telling you about my experience. I sat down, the registrar came in to see me, and he asked me quite a few questions, which I answered, but there were some that I wasn't so sure about, and eventually he asked me to sign a consent form, what he called an EPC form. And I didn't know what that was, and I was a little bit reluctant to do that until I knew a bit more, and obviously we were at loggerheads at some point during it. She said I felt a bit bad about it, but I asked him what an EPC form, and he was a bit short with me, and he just said, Madam, we need your consent to extract the products of your conception, EPC. And a few women in the audience just went, and that's how she felt, quite bad about that experience. She said, look, he was a nice enough gentleman and he was doing the best he could, but we just weren't connecting. Fortunately, the consultant came in the room, sat down with me, he wasn't standing, sat down with me and said, Marjorie, terribly sorry you've had this traumatic experience. I really would like to help you through this. Would you mind if I asked you a few other things? So it was, and for her, she said that was just wonderful, and she forgot about what had happened previous. But she did give me 2 words that I've never forgotten. She said, Mike, the first encounter with the registrar was transactional. It was like a transaction that you get in a commodity sort of thing. She says, my healthcare is more important than that. And she said, I know the registrar didn't wake up to have a bad day or with me, but she said, that's how it felt. And I can't deny how I experienced that episode of care. She said, but the consultant, fortunately, it was very much more interactional, not transactional. I said, what's the difference, apart from the semantics? And she said, well, he understood, even though he'd never had a miscarriage, what it might feel like to have gone through that experience. And he acknowledged the emotional part of what I'd gone through. I'm terribly sorry about this terrible experience you've gone through. It was a very quick, what we call concentrated compassion, to use the technical phrase, a very quick thing that doesn't take much time, but meant a lot to that person. It meant loads. And I said, how long ago did this happen? She said, 15 years ago. I said, are you still carrying that around? She goes, absolutely, Mike. It's as real as me today as it was 15 years ago. And I think that's the thing about healthcare. It's sacred space. It is personal. It is holy ground that we walk on. I mean, I guess that's my theological background coming out now. But, you know, it's the one-on-one. It's that healthcare, I guess. It's about suffering. And suffering is a mystery. But nothing more like suffering will deepen our own understanding and insights to who we are as humans in terms of our humanity. I'm not a romanticist. My wife will tell you that, because suffering is unkind, unfair, unjust, and often untimely. But it's what we're in this room. That's our trade. That's our product. That's our environment, that's our milieu, that's what we work within, people that suffer, and we're part of that as well. So what can we learn from it? I just got Stuart Diver there. I was fortunate to meet Stuart Diver. I'm in an Australian audience, and most will know that's the chap that was at the Thredbo skiing tragedy, and he spoke a little bit about his experience, and I was just fascinated again to hear, you know, what he'd been through with, you know, lying there in the still of night, you know, next to, you know, his dead wife that had died while they were lying together for a few hours, and he laid there for another 30 hours. And when he was whisked away, when they rescued him and he was whisked away to the medical facility that they'd set up to check his vitals, he said, you know, it was all good. He said, but I'll just tell you about my experience. He said, you know, there I was laying up, looking up at the ceiling, feeling, whilst all my vitals were being checked, I'm feeling okay, but I said I felt very alone. He said, you know, I felt really alone, and all I really wanted, he said, this is vivid in his mind, he just wanted someone that he could connect with and that he knew, and really to hold his hand, to put it in his words. And that person was his local GP, who happened to be sitting outside the room, but for obvious reasons wasn't allowed in the room. But, you know, for his experience, you know, to get up on stage in front of 1,500 people who really wanted to hear about what it was like being rescued, you know, that was the story he told about what it was like laying there and feeling so alone about what had happened and what would have helped him in his experience. He said all the technical stuff was good, you know, A1, but there was this other bit missing. And I guess, you know, that's why patient experience is extremely important. That's why there's a lot of focus on it, more so these days than there has been in the past. The reason for that is public confidence in our health system is more than clinical excellence. There's a psychological dimension to public confidence that goes beyond technical competence. Technical competence is extremely important. And what wins the hearts and minds of patients, the public, are the relational aspects of care. That's what people remember. That's the street talk. Now, and I guess there are two different worlds. There's the patient experience world and there's the technical competence world. But the two, I believe, can come together. I think they can work side by side, and I think we've proven that. The scientific literature has proven that. In fact, it says they're both important in terms of health outcomes. That if you lack one, you have a deficit in health outcomes. If you lack technical competency, obviously you can have deficit. If you lack a good patient experience, people don't listen to what you say, people don't act on your advice. There's lots of evidence around that. Patient experience, what is it? Well, there are 5 domains that people talk about. It's about access and waiting. It's about information and choice. It's about being safe, joined up care. It's about being comfortable in a friendly place as well. And it's also about those relationships and those communication skills that come into play. I guess what I want to mention is, how do we capture that experience for learning? So how do we, every day we're meeting patients and we're getting a bit of a feel for the vibe about how they think, what they think of us. But how can we capture it within our organisations, whether it's in pharmacy or within our nursing organisations? How do we capture that in a way that we can learn from it? Because I think the challenge is, for us, is to see the service as patients see it. And that's a challenge as a health professional. The reason for that is because we're tainted. We know how the health system works, whereas patients don't. I mean, I often hear people say, I'm a patient, Mike. And yes, you are. You're all patients in the room, but you're tainted in a good sense, in the sense that you're not a patient that hasn't worked in the health system and understands how it works. So how do we get a feel for what patients, how they see the service through their eyes? And having a voice, patient voice, is not the same as being heard. I want to come back to that in a tick. And how do we have meaningful conversations with patients? How do we create that partnership? Now, some of you in the room, I know the pharmacies in the room, some are doing patient surveys through the Pharmacy Guild, getting a feel for the patient experience of pharmacy in your practice. And that's fantastic because there are benchmark data against other pharmacies. So you can see not only how you perform within your pharmacy, you can see also how you perform against other pharmacies. For the nurses, I believe there's about a third of the room that are pharmacies, about a third nurses. Hands up, nurses. Yeah, quite a lot of nurses, half of the nurses. So in your organisations, how do you get that feedback that's real and timely, and in a way that you can start to feel or understand the patient journey, that patient story? We recently launched in Australia Patient Opinion Australia. It's based on the British have been doing this now for about 5 or 6 years, where pretty much patients can tell their story, good, bad or indifferent, live, online, and people within the services are email alerted those stories that relate to their unit, their area of responsibility. Very powerful and a real opportunity, a platform for that understanding the patient's voice and giving patients an opportunity to be heard, because the services can then respond back to patients in real time about that with that dialogue. As I said, we only launched recently, and that's a picture of the front page of the website where the stories are posted. Everything's moderated. It was actually founded by 2 doctors in the UK, 2 medical doctors, because they were a little bit peeved about all the doctor rate websites that didn't seem to lead anywhere. And what they wanted, something that was constructive and that would lead to service improvement, that would make a difference. So that's a little bit of a flow chart. If you look at the left there, service user, most websites will stop at telling the story, like if you go on Facebook or Twitter. And, people are already writing about you on Facebook, on the social media. But this is a way of capturing it and being in control of it. And most stories will stop at the story. But when the stories are when staff are email alerted, with those stories. That's quite powerful in changing culture within organisations, to hear the stories that come through. I mean, generally there'd be 3 or 4 stories a week that are email alerted to service providers, particular people within that, and they can see what patients are saying about their service. Not necessarily about the individual clinicians, although that does happen, with names removed, but because it's moderated, but more about the service, and there's an opportunity to respond within an organisation to those stories, but it's all about service improvement. I guess the scary bit for organisations is that people are watching. This is open and transparent to the Australian public. People can see what people are saying about their healthcare experience. They can also see how service organisations are responding or not to that. So it's a two-way street. And with service improvement, I guess this goes back to Father Dan, the Franciscan friar. I guess people don't simply just want to rate a service like a film or a movie. They want to tell their story. I'm sure when I asked you, is the patient's experience is everything, you all had a story or a comment to make. And people love talking about their healthcare experience because it means so much to them. Our site's only just launched, but in the UK they've had over 39,000 stories posted across the British Health Service. Quite powerful. Interestingly, there's been about 300 organisations signed up to that, and the quality of responses from organisations, a little bit like patient experience, it's on a continuum. So you can get your formulaic response. Thanks for telling us. Please contact our Complaints Commission person. Here's their phone number. Right through to, we're sorry you've had that experience, we are working on that, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think this is all about that partnership approach. I think it's this sort of different kind of relationship that we're being dragged into the 21st century with health consumers and health providers. And I think it's nothing to be fearful of. I think health providers and health organisations need to embrace this. It's an opportunity to show the good work we do, to take control of some of the bad press that we do get, and instead promote this as something that's productive for both patients and health providers. I just put this up as my last slide, then we'll take some questions. This is just the Oxford and Radcliffe Hospital in the UK. There's many more of them that do this. They actually put the widget on their site, on their homepage, so patients go directly onto the hospital site and write their stories about their experience and about that particular hospital. So you can just see the rolling stories, and over half the comments, and this is what tends to surprise people, about 60% of comments are actually positive. And when I say positive, very positive. The other 40 range from mildly positive to mildly negative to somewhat negative. So that's all I really wanted to say at this point, because I know we've got morning tea soon. But thank you for listening. Good luck with your work. And just any questions, more than happy to take some questions. Thanks, Simon. Cheers.